bakery got raided a couple of years ago, and my friend Owen Smith, no relation to me, was arrested and charged with possession for the purpose of trafficking in THC for making food and skin products for members of the Cannabis Buyers Club. And it's a very interesting charge because THC is legally available as Marinol. It's available in Sativix, spray made by JW Pharmaceuticals. But nevertheless, the medical marijuana access regulations only allow for the dried plant and do not allow one to make hashish or resin products. And in fact, if you make a food or skin product out of your legal medical marijuana and you strain it, you've in fact created a drug called THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. And so this problem is one that has never really been addressed in a court before. Many clubs like mine have been charged, or people have been charged and arrested. We've been through 4 trials or raids in our club. We've beaten every single charge. But nevertheless, the trafficking THC charge was laid against my friend Owen again a couple of years ago. And we started the trial in January. And it has been amazing. We had Dr. David Pate come up here from California. He actually designed the strains that JW uses in their Sativix. And he was able to show the judge that there is no difference between the resin, or no scientific justification for saying that the resin is somehow different from the plant. If the plant is legal, then the resin that forms on the surface of that plant is legal as well. You can't have some distinction in law when there isn't one in science. And Dr. Pate did an excellent job explaining the benefits of cannabinoids and various extraction processes, and we're extremely happy with his testimony. And we had 4 members of the club testify. My partner Gail as well. You can read on the back, we have a copy of Monday Magazine about the trial and some of her testimony. And we had 4 ladies testify for the club on their use of the cookies and saws and such. And we did a great job. Lawyer Kurt Tusaw did excellent. But what really surprised us was the absolute failure of Health Canada to defend its program. In fact, they didn't even send someone out from the program. They sent a scientist out, and that scientist submitted an expert report, and Kirk was able to discover that he didn't even write his own conclusions in that report. His boss from the MMAR cut and pasted the conclusions into his scientific report for him. And the whole point of this, what's called voir dire in our trial, is to prove that Health Canada is in contempt of court decisions, in contempt of medical marijuana users. In fact, the language the Crown used to describe patients was so harsh that the judge started to refer to them as patient suspects, because as soon as you use cannabis as medicine, the government treats you like a suspect as much as they do a patient, in fact more in some cases. And we have likely the best judge in the province, I think, in this matter. He's been very engaged, and we're convinced that we've not only won, but at the end, it was quite brilliant, because you're asked to provide a remedy to the court, right? So we've asked for a stay of proceedings. The judge has pretty much acknowledged there's a Section 7 violation of patients' rights here that can be extended to the caregiver, Owen. And so now the court seeks a remedy, right? Like, what are we supposed to do? So Kirk very meekly suggested that we just needed to change the definition of marijuana in the MMAR. And that if we allowed, cannabis resin and cannabis extracts to be included in the MMAR, then it would be fixed. Well, the Crown got up and said, oh, there's all sorts of problems with that. You can't just go change the policy. That's the government's job. And now we'll have all these problems trying to find out how much people have in their possession if they've got all these cookies in the fridge, and we can't figure out how much cannabis is in their cookies and such. So Kurt said, well, hey, if the Crown's right and you can't or shouldn't make up these policies, and you've determined there's a Section 7 violation, then you have no choice but to strike down the medical marijuana access regulations as unconstitutional, declare the cannabis law as dead outright, and tell the government that they've got to fix the program and come up with something that would be constitutionally valid before the courts. We're quite certain that that is what the judge is going to do. Now, obviously, we have to wait till the decision. It won't be until April. at the end of the month, we'll get an exact date on when that decision will come down. It will be appealed. The Crown has said as much, so we'll be celebrating that day, but it won't be until the Court of Appeal confirms this decision that we can truly celebrate. It's not really binding on the lower court level. But this trial here, we believe, is going to be very significant on a lot of levels. There's been many clubs raided in the last couple of years. Our court case should actually, break it open so that no convictions for medical marijuana suppliers should be able to stand in court until such time as a new program comes into effect. Health Canada's ignored court decisions before. They'll ignore them again, so we don't have our breath held. But we do have our fingers crossed. And the next speaker today has his fingers crossed, but he's got his T's crossed and his I's dotted. And we're really looking forward to the future of Randy's fight. This gentleman has been fighting for almost 2 decades since being caught smoking a joint with a friend in a truck in White Rock back in '93. Randy Caine has gone out of his way to bring this fight to the forefront. And it's a pleasure to work with him. It's a pleasure to know him. It's a pleasure to have him here today. Thank you very much, Randy.
Well, these have been great talks so far. Wonderful things that we hear, but then it's an application, and that's where many of us struggle. We hear great things about this medicine, we hear about its history. What I've done, I operate a dispensary in Langley, the Langley Medical Marijuana Dispensary. It was something that came, I operate also stores called Hempology, and when I opened up a business in the city of Langley 3.5 years ago, what came to me was an individual in the community that needed support, had heard that marijuana may act as a medicine for this individual. For me, that began, well, I guess really when I decided to step into what was happening. When this lady came in, Rose, I'll use her name, she came in with her daughter, and the first thing she said to me when she came through the door, "Do you know where I can get any marijuana?" And that told me I had a person who was really, didn't have a broad understanding. We began to talk, found out she had fibromyalgia, she'd been dealing with unmanaged pain for about 14 years, and had heard that the use of marijuana may alleviate some of her symptoms. I tried to turn her away. I felt that maybe I wasn't the best person to help her in the community. There were other dispensers. I tried to recommend that she go into Vancouver, that they might be able to help her. The look in her eyes, I have to tell you, I became just another person to turn her away. I decided at that moment that I would assist. This, for me, became quite transformational in terms of, I guess, my place, my depth of understanding, my desire to support. I saw a woman who came in a week later who I could hardly recognize. She began to be able to live her life again. She could walk. She could participate in her life. From there, I slowly began to work in the community, began to perceive that maybe there was a need. To try to discover what that could be, I began to advise the community of what my future might bring to them. So I put on a community event. This would have been about 3 years ago, called Medicinal Marijuana, Is It Right For You? Is It Right For the Community? My sense has always been, in order to truly bring medicinal marijuana into the community, we need to ensure that all of the stakeholders of a community are involved. That would be those that oppose as well as those that support. It would include the police. It would include legal officials. It would include all of the stakeholders. I believe that if you deny access to any one of these individuals, it will continue to keep the door closed. People will feel they're not going to be part of it, and they will resist it. So for me, that was the first step, was to really begin to engage a community. It was phenomenal, this first turnout. It was a real struggle, I've got to be honest with you, to try to rent a hall in the community that was very opposed to just me running a Hempies. To try to bring that forward, I labored over trying to convince them to rent me a community hall, a hall that should be available to all of us. Once I was able to rent the hall, It still needed to be advertised. I could not get businesses that would allow me to put anything up in their windows. The library would not put up anything on their bulletin board. What I eventually had to do was to go and just illegally put them on lamp standards, people's cars, anything. We had a huge turnout. I mean, I call it huge. The city of Langley is a very, very small community. We had a turnout of about 70 people that were enthusiastic. We had a great panel that came out. I really wanted the community to come to understand, and like I say, to participate in what was coming their way. From that point forward, for me, I had more people come to me that were looking for assistance. I'd like to stress, too, is that it's not something that I necessarily really wish to do. I'm a non-medical user. I did not want to be involved, but there was nobody else on the staff. That is the truth. I would never want anybody to put me on a pedestal or suggest that somehow my actions were extremely altruistic. I did it because I couldn't refuse, and like I say, nobody else would do it. From that, it began to be understood around the town what I was willing to do. I live in a community, it's a lot of seniors, so of course, I had a lot of them arriving to my doorstep. Over the course of about a year following, it grew from that one person rose up to about 60 people. It was also the desire behind this model was to bring it to people at affordable pricing. That really became the essence and strength of the model that I wanted. So many people, when they become ill, cannot afford their medicines. And so I began to work with local growers as my membership began to grow to try to find ways to get it into their hands at a better pricing. Was able to develop positive relationships with growers, mom and pop growers. We were then able to supply people at $5 a gram and operate by a $1 dispensary. That was able to finance it in terms of employing people. Through the course of about a year and a half, membership went up to about 70 people. I was doing very much like what Ted had done, and so many. You start out by doing deliveries, you take the phone calls, and you get in coffee shops. When you get to the point where you've got 60 or 70 people, and you're dealing with predominantly a lot of older people, this was really not the way to handle it. I was hunting around for different locations to see if I could get a dispensary operating in my community. I couldn't seem to find anybody that would rent to me. I expanded my store, Hempology, found that I had a place where I could do it, and at this point, decided to have a storefront. That became very transitional in everything that I was doing in the community. Although I had been very upfront, the RCMP had been very much aware. I had submitted licensing proposals to the city, to the township of Langley. I'd involved the other politicians, the mayor, council members. I had operated in a very, very transparent fashion over a period of time of trying to get a dispensary together. Eventually, it came to the point where, like I say, I went and had these great discussions. The RCMP, I had an hour-and-a-half meeting with the superintendent in the city of Langley the day that I was going to open up my dispensary. I thought it was very good. His name's Superintendent Derek Cook. Went, just laid it all on the table. This is where we're at. There is a very clear need in the community. I have not solicited this need, and had this wonderful conversation. Left his office believing that everything was wonderful, which it was. We operated for about a year, transferred to another location, and then, of course, we were raided. I'm kind of speeding through this because where we're at now, once again, is this inability for people to access. I've heard wonderful conversations about this, but the greatest difficulty we face at this moment is utilizing this medicine in the fashion that it ought to be. People shouldn't be afraid to use this. They shouldn't be isolated in their communities. But increasingly so, we're just not having the type of support. I think, Dr. Paul was talking about this, trying to engage physicians, trying to engage the medical community with the stigmas that are associated with this has really been, I think, the most difficult aspect. Myself, right now, I'm going to be moving through the court process, but as Ted's talked, this is a very lengthy thing. It can take upwards of a year, 2 years, while all the time more and more people are just waiting to try to gain their access. I've heard now recently there's going to be another dispensary opening up in Surrey. I'm unclear as to what that's going to be about, but the requirement for people to access this medicine. I hear people in here that've got children with health problems. We hear from so many. When I worked in this field, I would have individuals that would come into the office. Predominantly, I work with seniors. I would say is that we as a group, I think it'd be very, very fair to say, illness is something that's on tags you much later in your life. So predominantly, I'm dealing with the senior group. These individuals, by the stereotyping, the stigmatizing that is taking place in the community, are even afraid to reach out on their own. Without people like yourself, like Chris, like Paul, like Ted, that continue to beat that drum, we're really falling behind in terms of trying to support people. I'm absolutely staggered by the fact that we would stand in the way of people who are sick. In Canada, we pride ourselves in our health programs, in our social programs, and yet time and time again, we're running into these very same obstacles, yet with a very clear understanding that these programs are vital. We do have the MMAR, we do have medicinal marijuana, we do have the wonderful research, we have the great people that are doing this research, but now you try to blend these two together, and this is where the struggle happens. I'll get back now to talking about some of the access problems for individuals in terms of even the pricing. The model that I created in the township of Langley was really built around increased access. As I said, people, when they get sick, the very first thing that happens is they lose their job, their finances are compromised, they cannot afford their medicines. $10 a gram in Vancouver, $12, I understand the overhead, but when you're dealing in communities where you're dealing with seniors, you're dealing with people that are much more compromised, I really felt that applying more frugal applications for people, so they could access the medicines, is really the way to go. $5 a gram and the $1 dispensing fee separated the profit that can be taken on medicine and sort of ensuring that we had monies in which to operate our business. We were able to employ people, we were able to pay our overhead, we were able to do this in a fashion that is not exploited in any fashion. Because the reason I bring it up is there's been concern that marijuana, or what many of us are doing, is simply to exploit or to take advantage. And very clearly, that is not what's taking place here. As we're going to end up in court with so many of us, we're riding there under trafficking charges. That's what I've been charged with, is trafficking. Possession for the purpose of trafficking. I was caught with over 8 pounds, many, many candies. And so this is how they're going to try to define what we do. In fact, all we're really doing.
Sorry to interrupt, but was it simple, or not simple, but is it just cannabis charges, like no THC or resin charges from the
Well, there was
food
also
stuff?
Candies and cookies and all the rest.
Was there a separate charge for that, or just one
No, this
charge?
was just basically it. I mean, they struggled with what they tried to do with us. I mean, I live in a much more, like the city of Langley, I don't know if people are familiar with it, but the city of Langley represents about 25,000 people. It's very conservative, extremely Christian right-wing. It's dominated by the Christian Life Assembly that's in this area. The moral impact that lays within that community. You see, the day before I opened my store, Hempology, and I don't carry bombs, I don't carry the rest of it, they revoked my business license. There's been this sense that I have some agenda, something that's nefarious, something that's quite hidden. And so this whole notion of what happened with my dispensary and what's happened in the community has only been built upon moral outrage. They labored with what they tried to do in terms of shutting us down. Like I said, I had these discussions with the superintendent of the RCMP a year prior to our raid. Now, I'd like to believe that when you operate on such a level of transparency, that that you're somehow sheltering yourself. I mean, this is what the Barron case talked about, which was having to do with transparency. If you're going to set yourself up as a dispensary, it should be very clear on what you're doing and also be very, very open. This was the whole reason behind what we did here. Now, when you turn to your community leaders, and I'll look at it this way, is that when you turn to your superiors and you ask them for guidance or for support or something like this, so I've turned to the mayor, I've turned to the police, I've turned to council members, and throughout the course of that year that I was operating a dispensary, although we're fully aware I've been doing this for about 3.5 years, we run into, I thought we'd made our way through a lot of things. But when we get now to where they've decided to bust me, based upon, all they really did is they were not able to get a search warrant based upon any illegal actions taking place at the dispensary. They got their search warrant based upon there was a smell of marijuana coming from the dispensary. They were not able to get their search warrant, the first one that they tried to get through Surrey State. They went there to that courthouse. They could not get a judge that was willing to sign for a search warrant. They then had to go back, go out to Chilliwack, produce less information. Because the first time they went in, they were trying to say that I was, doing this illegally, supplying medicinal marijuana. The justice in that case said, well, he does have his exemption through Health Canada, and there's no evidence that he's done anything illegal. Now they go back, they're frustrated. They now go up to Chilliwack. All they tell the judge out there is, we smell the odor of marijuana coming from this location. And we once talked about it being a dispensary and like this. So this is how far it would appear they're willing to go. The case that Ted's talking about over on the island, this one I think is very, very vital for me and for probably any of us in terms of trying to establish the parameters in which we're going to operate within. Because very clearly, the dispensaries are needed. We've got how many in Vancouver now? There must be a dozen or more that are operating in Vancouver. So it appears that there is a safe zone. There does seem to be an understanding and an appreciation for the need and for the people to have this access. Once you step outside of Vancouver, it becomes much more difficult. We have the raid in Burnaby. There's been them over in Comox. There was one up in Kamloops. We do, however, have 2 dispensaries that operate, one in Kelowna and one in Vernon. These are both licensed too. So there's this tremendous disparity in trying to get this medicine out to people, to really understand that what we're dealing with first and foremost, and I think this is what disturbs me the most, is that there's a complete and utter disregard for the single reason why we're all here. Why all of this debate is taking place, the social, the political, the legal, all of this debate is only really about one thing. It's about the sick. That's simply it, and that is so regularly disregarded. This step beyond that. You say, well, but it's about marijuana, and it's about resin, or it's about cookies, and it's like, no. That's really after the fact. The issue here really is, how do we go about treating our sick? Do we treat our sick, or do we deny this one group? And that is something, like I say, I've even seen in my community with how the mayor will operate. There always seems to be something else that he would suggest that he's trying to do. Well, there's no regulation. When I tried to get a business license, I submitted licensing proposals. I followed it through, recognizing, like I say, trying to invite all the stakeholders. I put on these community events to encourage the community to become part of it so they can all be part of this decision making, and at each turn I get denied. Although the raid on some level appears to be a bit problematic, I mean it is for me, it's more important that now I have access to the court system. Without that ability, and this is where Ted and others that have had to step before the courts, this becomes the great opportunity. I know the raid was ultimately intended to instill fear. That's really what it's about, to try to make an example of somebody like myself, somebody like Mark, so many. It is to scare off the rest of you. I think we can all stand here in front of you, aside from Mark, who is paying the greatest price right now. But the vast majority of us we walk free every day. Fear is only really largely something that will cripple you. But they do want to use it. I think that's something that I'm grateful that, in fact, if this was going to come out, that if there was an individual, and like I say, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, it's not like that. But I'm grateful that it was me that got busted. I can accept this pressure. I can accept whatever is going on here. I know what it tries to do. It tries to dismantle us. It tries to destroy our family. It tries to cause you to stop. Ted said, I got caught with a roach about 20 years ago. And that was the most liberating moment in my life. It came from, I can tell you the great moment. I was sitting in the back of the police car in White Rock. This was in 1993. We just got caught with a roach. And I'm sitting in the back of the police car. It's on a Sunday, very busy at the beach. I'm looking out the back window, and off in the distance, not that far, but just, enough out, I see what I believe to be a mother and a father with their child. And the father's bent down, talking to his son, and pointing over at me. Now my sense of that is that I was being set as what not to be. What that caused me to do on some levels, I went down kind of quickly a little mental checklist on what I was as the person I am. And as I went down the list, I said, okay, I've been with the same lady for a lot of years, I've come with great kids, I'm productive, I'm trying to say that I'm the best person in the world, but in terms of being Canadian, I was a fairly decent individual. But when I got down to the point here where I was a pot smoker, it negated everything. And that was the thing I could not accept, was at that moment. From that, I think as many of you know, is that it led to a constitutional challenge that brought in a lot of people. Chris Clay came into this, David Malmo Levine. It set some new foundations for us. It was a real struggle. But that's the sort of that's where we really come from. I'm old enough to recall a time, let's say when I was in, very young, let's say 17, 18, or even younger than that, we were truly hunted like animals. I have friends that back at that period of time that did 2 years less a day in Ocala for a roach. I had buddies that did over 2 years in BC Fed because they had a joint. So it can appear at times that we're not moving along very quickly. But in my brief life, I'm 58, in my brief life I've seen us come so far. Really, we're right at that tipping point. Like I say, I do not believe that we will ever go back that far. We have come this far forward. The beauty of it is that now we're also, I think, quite multi-generational in terms of the attitudes. When I was being raised when I was younger, my parents and then my parents' parents were the two generations that were opposing us. So I'm talking back in the hippie generation. So that was a lot of significance for them. And then when we grew and we began to have children, well, all of a sudden they tried to go after get our children to turn us in, or our parents to still turn us in. We've evolved. We now have 3 generations at least. My parents, if they were, so that generation ahead of me, if they're still alive, are strong understanders, strong supporters. They've watched their children grow. They've watched how they've developed. They've watched them raise families. So a lot of that stigma has been lifted. It is really quite staggering, though, in terms of what we're talking about here. The medicinal application of it still seems to have a tremendous amount of taboo associated. I think maybe a lot of it has to do with is that the use of medicinal marijuana largely is a substance at this point is utilized by an older group. I talked about this matter with the superintendent when he asked me what was the median age of the members in our club, and I said, well, I would say probably 50 to 55, which he was quite shocked by. And I said, well, if you think about it, this is the young ones generally are healthy. So that really kind of said, we have some, of course, that have got life conditions, but we're really dealing with end of life. We, as the species that we are, we die for a long time. Like that turn in our lives can start for a great many when they hit 50. We begin to have the beginnings of the aches and the pains and this type of thing. But we can live for 30 more years, or 40 more years. And so the use of this medicinal marijuana is really something that can be followed through the whole life. So dealing with that end-of-life process. Pain management is quite significant. I mean, Dr. Paul was talking about this. The amount of pain management that we dealt with in our dispensary, I would say, was probably 80%. It was significant because we're dealing with end-of-life, which can be your arthritis, it can be other disorders that can take place, eating disorders, other physical ailments that can really come into people. Which one is the one in the that's going to step up? And it's not that you step up because you want somebody to pat you on the back, or that you feel anything more than it's just, it's time for you. You know, when I got busted with that roach, it really came down to that point, which is now I either put up or I shut up. That was the face when I looked in the mirror and had to decide, was I going to challenge it? Because we assured in 1995 to challenge drug laws. Christ, it alienated my friends. It just about destroyed me with my family. This was pretty wacky. It's not something that I necessarily wanted to do or chose to do. It was something that chose me and it needed to be done, and so, okay, I will do this. There's no doubt about it. But my path has been all over. I've worked in drug law reform. I run empty stores. I talk with my neighbors. I'm deeply involved, but not for any other reason. And I'm totally committed to the hypocrisy, the lunacy, and the tragedy of what I've witnessed. Because something has to be done. I could have made myself a victim when it all first started, but you know what? This is about so much about others. We're also fortunate. You know, all of us in this room, we can walk out of this place at the end of this meeting, go about our lives in probably tremendous physical and mental comfort. We do know that there's none of it on. And so, by your being here, by your listening to what some of us have to say, maybe you can carry that, maybe it inspires you, maybe it gives you the sense of freedom to be able to speak. And that is really what's going to make the great change, is the voices. There's too few that speak. There's so many good people that don't do any good things. I don't want that to sound overly critical, but at a certain point, I do get disturbed by it. I really do. You know, it's all wonderful to put words on, you know, and let your lips talk about it. But we need more people to act. We truly do. And I assure you, here we all stand in front of you. Like I say, but for Mark, and then he has paid the great price. But the vast majority of us, we speak freely. You know, look to those around you that are speaking, and you see that, you know, they don't necessarily have to live in fear. You can liberate yourself. So on that, I'll just kind of leave it.
Thank you so very much, Randy, for speaking, and you truly are one of the most gentle souls in this movement. I just love your presence and love your words, and thank you so much for coming here today and sharing them with us.